Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Do you ever watch a film and then wonder if it will become a classic, if its story will continue to entertain for generations to come? Well, I do, and I had the pleasure of discovering that the original Karate Kid holds up pretty well. The way I discovered this is I showed a clip of that film in my 7th grade class. I showed the famous wax on, wax off scene to them, and they didn't groan too much. It held their attention, 25, 30 years later. So I guess I need to explain to you why that is an appropriate Jewish educational experience in the 7th grade. The students this semester have been learning, among other things, God. Small topic. And we have looked at various ways of understanding God. We talked about, does God perform miracles? We discussed, if God is all-powerful, does that mean God is responsible for evil? We pondered the difference between free will and God determining our fate, and how might those two things work together. And the last lesson we did was on the concept of commandedness. A classic way for Jews to relate to God is that God commands us to do 613 things, and we respond or relate to God by doing those commandments. So that's where the film clip came in, because this idea of being commanded it's not a popular theology with the modern American Jew. Our country was founded by our rebellious forefathers who were sticking it to the British and who structured pretty much our entire government and culture on the rights of the individual. We, as Americans, romanticize figures like the cowboy in the Wild West, who is beholden to no particular community and is wildly independent and self-sufficient. So telling people that there is a higher power, either God commanding us or a community causing us to feel pressure to conform, is not the most popular theology for the modern American Jew. And I needed to explain to these 7th graders, as they're forming their own personal theologies, why they might consider a concept of being commanded by God into their Jewish identity and into their spiritual practice. The first reason I gave them is in the Torah itself. When the Jews are receiving the commandments at Sinai, they say, Na'aseh v'nishma, which translates to, we will do it, and then we will literally hear it, but what it means is we will do it and then we will understand it. So I showed them the scene from Karate Kid. For those of you that don't know the story, there's a teenage boy named Daniel. He's moved to a new city and it's not going well for him. He is being bullied. And at the end of a school dance, he's chased down an alley and this group of kids is starting to beat him up. Out of nowhere appears this very small, rather ancient Asian man who beats up the entire gang and takes Daniel home to help mend his wounds. And Daniel says to Mr. Miyagi, can you teach me how to do that? Can you teach me martial arts? And Mr. Miyagi says, no problem. And when Daniel shows up for his first lesson, it turns out Mr. Miyagi collects classic cars, and he tells Daniel to wash dozens of them and then wax them. And the next day, when Daniel shows up for his lesson, he has him paint a fence. And the next day, finally, Daniel gets frustrated, and he says to Mr. Miyagi, I came to learn martial arts, and you're having me wash your cars? And of course, Mr. Miyagi, knowing the principle of Na'aseh v'nishma, you will do it and then you will understand it, shows him that this is the basic movement one needs to block an opponent's blows. And Daniel understands that this has all been in the plans. Sometimes mitzvot work that way too. Sometimes you have to do it for a while to understand it. For example, coming to shul on Shabbat morning. Those of you who have been coming for decades have probably discovered value in the experience, and probably at different stages in your life, different kinds of value from spending your time here on a Saturday morning. You had to do it before you could understand it. It leads to the next point I discussed with the children. It's a quote by Abraham Joshua Heschel, who says, the purpose of observance is to train us in achieving spiritual ends. The The purpose of observance is to train us in achieving spiritual ends. We, as human beings, are always trying to elevate our souls, to grow into being bigger and better than we were before. Like caterpillars or snakes shedding our skin, we have the power to expand our spiritual capacity throughout our lifetime. If I said, I want you to achieve the spiritual end of showing love, that might be a bit of a mystery, but if I give you a specific direction, a commandment, and I say, hug your mother, right, then you know how to show love. And so the same is true of the commandments. For example, the mikveh. If I say, cherish your spouse, what does that mean? That's a broad spiritual command. But if I say, each month, I want you to set aside a time where you separate from your spouse in order to both have your own private time as an individual and to increase your appreciation of the person through the separation, now I've given you a specific direction that helps you achieve a spiritual end, which is, how do you appreciate a spouse? Well, here is one way. Here is a Jewish way to do it. The third reason that I gave the children of why we might follow the idea of commandedness is that rules create order. For example, the city of Richardson has installed traffic lights, and we all understand the rule to be red means stop, green means go, yellow's up for debate. But for the most part, the reason we have the rule of the stoplight is so that we can drive safely and get to where we're going. And the same is true in Jewish law. We are commanded to establish courts. And in those courts, we are not to take bribes. And in those courts, we require 2 witnesses. This is to perpetuate a society that is just and ordered and protected. And the commandments are not just laws to protect the entire society, but sometimes they are to protect the individual. For example, Shabbat. Shabbat puts a limitation on how hard we can work, right? Many of us feel like we have never accomplished the full extent of the task that we wish to accomplish, and how can we possibly stop? And are we adequate human beings? And Shabbat says, I'm going to put a law that protects you from yourself. You will rest. You will create time for reflection and connection with your fellow human beings. I wonder if our Jewish forefathers knew that the concept of commandedness would be a classic. Much like when you write a film, do you know if it will be a classic? Because there are some parts of commandedness that are not so popular. It's not always convenient. It doesn't always suit the taste of our particular time period. And yet, it's interesting, there are not very many people practicing the ancient Egyptian religion. There are not very many people practicing the ancient Greek tradition, but somehow this idea of Judaism, which centers a lot on the concept of commandedness and of bringing those concepts down through the generations, is still with us. And a number of our practices look very much like they did when they were written down in the Torah. So I would say that the theology of commandedness is a classic. Now, however, when you watch a classic film, sometimes you have to watch it more than once to really appreciate it. The language might feel a bit stilted, or the cinematography might seem a bit strange to us. But to get down to the fundamental message that the artists used to create the film, once you get there, you say, oh, I want to see that film again. So my hope is, as you ponder the concepts of commandedness and why you might do it, Na'aseh v'nishma, we'll do it and then we'll understand it. Or as Heschel taught us, the purpose of observance is to train us in achieving spiritual ends. That might be a reason. Or finally, that commandedness gives us a just and ordered society and a just and ordered self. As you contemplate these great classic concepts, I hope that you will have many a repeat viewing and participation in this Jewish theology. Shabbat Shalom.